Hello, and we are live. I am so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tom Roberts. I perform poetry under the name Tomfoolery, and I am a poet, author, and filmmaker based in London. First off, I want to say a massive thank you to all the pupils and teachers out there who have tuned in to today's session, because we are going to do some creative writing all on the theme of remembrance. Now, I'm coming to you live today from the Poppy Factory in Richmond, and honestly, this venue is so beautiful and the perfect place to be doing an activity like this. This has been organised by the National Literacy Trust and the Royal British Legion. And as we know, the Royal British Legion is a charity which helps the armed forces community, and that means veterans, people serving in the armed forces today, and their families. So we want to say a massive thank you to the National Literacy Trust and the Royal British Legion. So why are we here? We're here because we all want to try 9 and 11s to use our creativity to come up with our own poems on the topic of remembrance. Now, how do we do that? Where do we begin? Okay, let's jump into the first exercise, because when you are writing a poem, you need to first find, this is one of my favorite words, your stimulus, right? This is where we begin. This is the jumping off point. Now, I hear some of you asking, thinking to yourselves, Tom, what do you mean by stimulus? This isn't a word I'm going to need to know in school for a good few years yet. No. 9 and 11s, you deserve it. Now, a stimulus is, imagine if you looked outside and you saw a big, beautiful tree swaying in the breeze. Did it always start its life as a big, beautiful tree, or was it once something different? Was it once something absolutely tiny and in need of protection and care and love? Of course it was. Let me see if anyone is crying out in the chat about what our big, beautiful tree start. Of course, class 2 from Scarisbrooke St. Mark's. You were the first in. It is a seed. It is a seed. Well, that is exactly how I would love for you to think about your stimulus. It is a seed. The way that the seed turns into that beautiful tree, your stimulus is the idea that is going to grow into your poetry. You see what I did there? Okay, I'm so sorry that's much too cheesy. But we need to come up with our seed, and how do we do that? Okay, we're going to start by creating a little bit of a garden in the corner of our page. We're going to create a garden. Now, what I'm going to do in a moment is try and, when you look at this word stimulus, it may remind you of other words that you already know. It may remind you of the word stimulate, right? Sometimes we have to stimulate our imaginations to get us started before we can write. I'm going to show some images on the screen. Maybe we can pull those images up now. Now, as you look at these images, I want you to think about words that come to mind. So what do we have here? We've got some beautiful candles, some reflective candles. We've got 2 images, an old historical image of the cenotaph draped in a Union Jack flag with people lining the streets. We've got a very modern cenotaph with people paying their respects. And in the middle, we've got that beautiful red poppy that we've seen so many times, which acts as the symbol of remembrance as used by the RBL. Now, what I would like us to do is start populating this garden. So, in the chat, let's see what we've got. We've got wonderful ideas coming in. We've got history coming in. That's probably from that lovely black and white image. We've got remembrance, the lovely capital R, remembrance. We've got empathy. 9 to 11s, these are great words. Empathy, that sense of feeling things that other people have felt, feeling things that, we putting ourselves in the shoes of others. We've got waving their last goodbye, bravery. This is fantastic. We've got silence. As we move on to our next activity, you'll see why that one particularly stands out for me. Courage. Respect. What else do we have? War. We've got thanks. Okay, so as you can see, what we're really doing here is we're starting to give ourselves those jumping off points. We're starting to find those words that are going to spark the ideas that are then to come. Right? Now, as we begin to populate this garden, what I want you to start to do, if you've been doing this on your whiteboards, on your class boards, or in your books, now you're starting to have a bit of a garden of potential ideas, of stimuli. I want you to look at them. Which word is calling out to you? Which one do you want to be the seed that you look after and take all the way through into the creation of your poem, right? I was very pleased to see in the chat that someone put the word silence. What I want you to do now is circle the word in your garden that's going to be your stimulus. For me, silence is a really important term, because as we know that every year on November the 11th, when we have our acts of remembrance, sometimes we wear a poppy, like today I've got this red poppy that I'm wearing on my chest, but we also have a 2-minute silence, right? And that leads us nicely onto the next section. When I was asked to do these workshops, I was also asked to write a poem of my own, because it's not fair that I just get all of you to write poems, but I don't bring one myself. So I was thinking, what will my stimulus be? And just like one of you in the chat, I settled on this word silence, because I had so many questions. What does it mean? I remember being your age and being in school, and we would do our 2-minute silence. And sometimes I'd find myself thinking to myself, what should I be thinking about right now? all the adults look very serious. Should I be serious? What am I supposed to be doing with this period of time? And I sat down, and after some planning, which I'm going to take you through today, I wrote this poem. And I'd love to share it with you. I'd love to share it with you now. And as I'm reading the poem, I want you to think about, what does that silence mean to you? What does the silence mean to you before I've read the poem compared with after I've read the poem? What do you think about when you hear these words? So this poem is called Lasting Silence. I hope you like it. My teacher told us on Remembrance, we hold a silence 2 minutes long. What do they want us to remember? Why do we all fall silent, Tom? Let me explain it with a story. And once I'm done, I promise this, that every time you hear that silence, you will remember what it is. For a moment, imagine all that you're grateful for: to learn at school, to go out to play, to have a belly full, a cozy bed, and a place to live that's safe. Well, if you have those things, remember that as we sit here, boys and girls, such precious things are never certain for every person in this world. And not just those in far-off places, but in this land that we call home. In times that really aren't that distant, we've known great heartache of our own. Young futures bright with possibility, ready for all life holds in store, received the news as storm clouds gathered that now their country was at war. Imagine living in that story. I know it's really hard to do, but try to comprehend their feelings as if that fate found me or you. I'm sure sometimes they felt confident. I'm sure sometimes they felt scared. I'm sure sometimes they felt lost and all alone and ill-prepared. They marched away into that danger with heavy packs and heavy hearts. They longed for home, for friends, for family, but still they went to play their part. In fields and trenches, battles thundered, where lives were lost and futures torn, until at great long last it ended, and our silence suddenly was born. A silence cemented by their sacrifice, a silence bought by such a cost, a silence for each soul survivor, a silence for each soul we lost. And so the silence made its journey. It travelled on through time and years. It carried stories, grief and courage. It carried hope and carried tears. It passes yearly through the cenotaph. It swirls behind the marching bands. It rests in churches, schools and playgrounds. It lingers softly where we stand. The silence whispers, don't forget them, the ones who gave so much for you. Remember, peace is always fragile, and what you cherish, they fought through. It exists for all who shared their service from long ago to modern day, and every time you feel its presence, it sends your gratitude their way. So every year when stillness finds us, we bow our heads, our voices cease. That silence is a gift of memory, a thread of thanks, a prayer of peace. So now you know its precious meaning. I hope you'll guard that silence too. It will journey on through generations, but for now it rests with me and you. Thank you so much to you all for listening to that. It's always nerve-wracking when you share a piece of your work with other people, but really, and this is kind of why I'm so pleased that you've all showed up to this Zoom today. I honestly think there is nothing more valuable that you can possibly do than to turn your thoughts and ideas into words, organize them into words, and then share them with other people. I think that's how everything gets better, And so, if you sit down to write a poem for this workshop, whether it's during or after the workshop, then in some way you've just breathed some of your creativity into the world, and I think that's really valuable. So thank you, guys. Okay, so what I want you to think about while you were listening to that poem, while I was reading that poem, which parts of it stood out? What were you thinking about? You know, what was standing out in that poem? What were you feeling? Now, I want to use the next few minutes to tell you a little bit about my writing process. I really use this, this fun little game that I invented with myself a long time ago called the 1, 2, 3, right? What are you talking about, Tom? The 1, 2, 3. Okay. For 1 minute, I give myself 1 minute to create my possible stimuli. This is what we've already done. Our stimulus garden. History, remembrance, courage, empathy, war, respect, thanks, silence. For a minute, I just put as many words down as I possibly can that are going to make up my options. Then I pick one. Now, then we move into number 2 for 2 minutes. Give yourself slightly longer for this. I don't know if any of you out there have ever fancied yourselves a bit of an investigator. Maybe you've watched a detective show or something like that. This is where you've got to channel and harness your inner detective. I want you to ask that question, that stimulus, as many questions as you possibly can, right? So for me, I picked silence. So then in the 2 minutes, I just start asking questions. What does silence mean? Why do we have 2 minutes silence? What should I be thinking about? Who invented it? When did it start? When did we begin this tradition? If the silence was a person, what would that person look like? Would they be old or young? What would they be wearing? What would they feel? How would they speak to me? What would their voice sound like? You know, these questions can be absolutely anything. You know, and sometimes the more creative you're willing to be with those questions, the more it's going to help you for this next section, right? So in my 1, 2, 3 game, when I'm writing a poem like Lasting Silence, I'd start by doing a stimulus garden. Let's say I pick silence. It's then through interrogating your own idea, you know, through asking it questions, sometimes questions that you don't even think you'll have an answer to. That doesn't matter. You come up with as many questions as you possibly can about your stimulus, right? You do that for 2 minutes. Now you're in number 3. Now you do what is called a stream of consciousness. A stream of consciousness. What is that? I don't know if any of you out there have ever done a stream of consciousness before, but it is the most valuable writing exercise I have ever found. It's where you set your final amount of time. This time you have 3 minutes. And without worrying about spelling or grammar or punctuation or even sense sometimes, whatever comes into your head in answer to those questions, you start writing down, right? It was through that stream of consciousness that this poem, Lasting Silence, was born. It was through doing a stream of consciousness that I really went down the route of personifying the silence, right? I'd never thought of a silence like that before. I'd never thought of that 2 minute silence as a visitor that joins us every year. It was during that stream of consciousness that I started writing down things like, you know, where that visitor would show up, how they would act, you know, what they would say. There are lines in that poem: the silence whispers, don't forget them, the ones who gave so much for you. It passes yearly through the cenotaph. It swirls behind the marching bands. It rests in churches, schools, and playgrounds. It lingers softly where we stand. I'd never conceptualized that silence as a person who is with us all, you know, as we spend that period of time. And so it was through doing that, and it was through asking the right questions that opened that thought process in my mind, that I was able to think of the silence as someone who will be around for generations. So let's get in to our first activity. This is where we start to be creative. This is where we start to use our imaginations. So teachers, on the board, I would like us to create a simple chart of the things we are grateful for. The things that we are grateful for. This is This is a really nice thing to do every once in a while because we are so lucky. We are so lucky. In the poem "Lasting Silence," there was a brief stanza, which, as you know, is like a little poem paragraph where I tried to choose some of the things that I was grateful for. So I wrote, "For a moment, imagine all you're grateful for. To learn at school, to go out and play, to have a belly full, a cozy bed, and a place to live that's safe." Look, there are just 5 to get us started, but let's start. You know, if gratitudes, because really remembrance, you know, and that silence has to start with gratitude, right? So let's look in the chat. Oh, we're getting some good ones. Okay, food. Who's put food? I want to give them a shout out. Hannah Goodman has put food. Hannah, we would get on. I'm a massive fan of food. Oh, someone's put teachers. I wonder, was that a pupil or did a teacher, in fact, write that they are grateful for teachers? Either way, I agree. Teachers is valuable. Teachers go on our list. Let's see what else we are grateful for. Oh, I'm seeing lots of family. That's really beautiful. Family. You know, the people that take care of us, the people that guide us through life and make sure that we have all of the things we need. We've got learning. Okay, as I write down some of these ones from the chat, what I would love to do is in your own classes, start filling those boards with things you're grateful for, right? Because this is one of the first things I did after my stream of consciousness. I realized that I wanted the silence to be personified. I wanted it to be a visitor that would come year after year after year, not just for the last 100+ years, but for generations to come. And then I thought, okay, let's start by thinking about all the things we're thankful for to populate this first part of the poem. So we've got home. We've got education, space. Ooh, I like it. Education, space. Doctors and nurses. Doctors and nurses. True, I would say all professions, really. All the people that work so hard. Okay, so we've got feeling safe. That's so important. Okay, this is wonderful. You guys are a very grateful bunch. So we've got all these things we're grateful for, right? Now, in this next activity, what I want us to do is try and tap into that empathy. You know, one of you put in the first stimulus seed garden that we were growing, one of you put the word empathy, right? How do we tap into our empathy? What we have to do is we have to try to put ourselves in the shoes of people that we are not, of people that had to do things that we haven't had to do, that we hopefully will never have to do, you know? And so what I want you to do, teachers, is write on the board just 3 imagine ifs. So put a line under those lovely gratitudes. Imagine if. Let's think about what these imagine if sentences could be. Now, I want us to try and be empathetic and to think about, the things that people have had to do in their acts of service over the last, 100+ years. Imagine if, some people here have put food, right? Imagine if I had to live on rations. Imagine if I didn't have enough to eat. People have put teachers. Imagine if I no longer had teachers. Imagine if I had to learn everything all for myself, but I didn't have access to books. People have put family. Well, imagine if I had to leave my family. Imagine if I had to go off to a far-off place that I'd never been before, and there was a conflict there, and there were really difficult things going on, and I didn't know what to do. I had this section in the poem which came. The reason I'm referring back to the poem so much is because I want you to understand how these activities were so important and helpful for writing this particular poem. There's this stanza, imagine living in their story. I know it's really hard to do, but try to comprehend their feelings as if that fate found me or you. I'm sure sometimes they felt confident. I'm sure sometimes they felt scared. I'm sure sometimes they felt lost and all alone and unprepared. but they marched away into that danger with heavy packs and heavy hearts. They longed for home. So imagine if I had to march away to a place I'd never been, space. In the last session we did, no one put space. I didn't even think about space, but that's a beautiful one. Imagine if suddenly you were living in a trench and it was cramped and people were on top of one another and it was muddy and, all of these things. Use your imagination to try and put yourselves in the shoes of people who have lived lives that we may have seen in films or read about in books or heard about from our grandparents, Let's see what some of the imagine ifs are that are coming in the chat. Imagine if we had no medicine. Oh, that would be so difficult. Imagine if we had no water. Imagine, they don't all have to be, negative or dark. Here, imagine if there was a world of peace. That's come in from Amberley, the Year 6 teacher. That's lovely. Someone's put, imagine if there were no rules. Yeah, that would be interesting. I wonder whether things would all fall apart. Imagine if Mrs. Eckley, imagine if children had to be soldiers. Goodness, I hope we imagine if you never had doctors or nurses. Imagine if you had no transport. Imagine if you were without safety. See, instantly, right, through forcing yourself to ask these imagine if questions, you're feeling things, right? You're feeling that empathy, and that brings us beautifully into our next activity. Now, for me, when you're writing poetry, it's so important to begin by coming up with your idea. That's what we've done with our stimulus seed, asking it questions, doing a stream of consciousness to get as many of those ideas onto the page as possible. That is going to be your rocket fuel for writing your poem. Then tap into your feeling, right? Your emotional brain, your sense of empathy. But now let's think more, about what we know. Let's move away from that emotional brain and more into our factual brain. So I'm going to change colours. Let's have some lovely red. I want to start writing down, what does remembrance mean to each of you? And there's absolutely no wrong answer. This question is, what do you know already? What have you read? What have you seen? What have you been told? We've got this tradition of remembrance. But it means something, remembrance means something, and I want you to think about, what does it mean to you? What do you know? What have you been told? Let's see if anyone in the chat is writing. Remembrance is for those who sacrifice their lives for us. That is an amazing point. Remembrance means honouring those that risk their lives. This is something I've been so lucky. I've been able to work with the Royal British Legion since 2021, right? And something that they always remind me is remembrance is not just about those who have sacrificed their lives. It's about also the survivors, also the people who have dedicated their lives to acts of service, who then come home and come back into society. Remembrance is for all those people. That's why in the poem, we had remembrance for each soul survivor, remembrance for each soul we lost. Remembrance is for everyone. It's for even the families, the families of those affected, because, if someone you love, goes off to serve their country and you're back at home, you're equally affected. Remembrance is for regrowth. It's for, let's see what else. Remembrance is separation. Remembrance is loyalty. Remembrance is for those who got involved and stood up. Wow. Fantastic. Okay. Remembrance. Oh, sorry. I forgot my little N in remembrance there. Now, in this moment, what I want you to start populating your pieces of paper with are anything that you think is relevant that you might know, something you may have seen, something you may have read that is stimulating your remembrance. And what we're going to do in the next activity is we're going to take those emotional feelings, right, that we've got from our imagine if exercise, and then we're going to take these the things, to give you an example from my poem, it's more the section where you talk about things that happened. They marched away into that danger. They longed for home in fields and trenches. You may have seen pictures, still pictures from years ago of people in those trenches where battles thundered, and that's really what we're trying to tap into in this next section. Okay, so as we've populated our pages now with our stimulus seeds, we've asked questions to ourselves of, how can I find as many different angles as possible to interrogate that stimulus, to find out what it means. You've started to move into really creative spaces. For me, it was imagining this stimulus as a figure, as a character that moved through the ages and swirled around the cenotaphs and stood in the churches, schools and playgrounds. In all those places we have that silence. Then we've felt things, we've felt our gratitude, we've imagined what we'd have to do, and then we've thought more with our knowledge base about what remembrance means to us. Now it's time to start writing. So we're going to move into a creative writing activity, but first there's something that I would love for us to try. Since the topic of today has all been silence, it's all been what that silence means and enjoying that silence, I would love us to just, not for 2 minutes, we can do that in November on the 11th, but for the next 30 seconds, before we start writing, think about everything, all these ideas that we've populated our pages with, and what I would love us to do in your classrooms is to close down your eyes, and for the next 30 seconds, I want you to think about what that silence means to you, what remembrance means to you, and how you'd like to approach that within your piece of writing, okay? So we'll have 30 seconds of silence now. Okay. Thank you so much for doing that, wherever you are. I hope you were able to use that time to really center yourself and to think. I think exercises like stream of consciousness are so good for, that kind of frantic getting out of ideas. But sometimes before you begin, it's really nice to just center yourself, and have that moment of stillness, of calmness, of silence. That can be really helpful. So I hope it was. What I would like us to do is we are going to put a sample stanza, a practice beginning on the screen for you in a moment. And I would like, for the next few minutes, us to have a go at thinking about what comes next. What comes next in our poem. So the sample stanza, we'll pull it up now. When we fall silent all together, we share a moment peacefully. I want to tell you what I'm thinking and what the silence means to me. So we're going to leave that on screen for a moment. Teachers, if you are able, put that opening stanza on the board, or pupils, put it on your piece of paper. What I want you to do is answer that question. That question is an open invitation to all of you. I was speaking to the people at the National Literacy Trust just before we started, and I was told that today, over 45,000 of you are joining these workshops. Imagine if 45,000 pupils put down what that silence meant to them. How much positivity, how much gratitude could we throw out into the universe with all that creativity? So let's think about this. We've got some time now individually to just think about what comes next. When we fall silent all together, we share a moment peacefully. I want to tell you what I'm thinking and what that silence means to me. Now you'll notice some things about this stanza. I've written it very much in the rhyme scheme that I am most comfortable in. It's the ABCB rhyme scheme, which means, we have a little 4-line stanza and the rhyme falls at the end of line 2 and the end of line 4. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes without me distracting you, and I want you to think about how you could follow that stanza with a stanza of your own. And I'll be watching the chat, and if any teachers want to put their second stanza in the chat, I would love for you all to hear some of the creativity that's blossoming in schools out there. So let's spend a couple of minutes on this, and then we'll move on to the next exercise. All right. Okay. Very, very well done. I hope that was a nice couple of minutes. I understand completely that 2 minutes is not enough time to write a poem. I really hope you continue with these poems in your own time. But sometimes it's a nice amount of time to just get started and get some of those ideas out there. So let's see what some of you have been writing. Okay, so I've got from Rita Waters. To me, it means I'm taking time to fill my mind with gratitude for all that I am thankful for shelter, love, and yummy food. That's so nice. That is so lovely, and it's very much within the same style and tone as the first stanza we gave. So really, really great job there. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Okay, so when we fall silent all together and share a moment peacefully, I want to tell you what I'm thinking and what that silence means to me. Miss Hadley has written, silence means to me those who have fought and survived, and those who died to save our lives. That's really beautiful. I'm thinking of those that have fallen and sacrificed. I'm feeling grateful for what I have, seeing my life through fresh eyes. That's from Christchurch, Ramsgate, Year 5. Goodness, we've got some beautiful budding poems out there. Now, what I hope for more than anything is that as many of you as possible take the time after these workshops to put down in your own words what that silence means to you. What does remembrance mean to you? If you send those poems to the National Literacy Trust, your poem might be featured in their special act of remembrance on November the 12th. So, that's more encouragement than ever to just get writing and get some of those ideas down. Okay, so now as we as we move into the final section of this workshop, I wanted to make sure that I left time for any questions that you might have, because, you know, it's so lovely to get to spend this time with you all, and I know that there are some pupils out there that will be very interested in pursuing a career in something creative. And I know from first-hand experience that if the thing that you want to do with your life is creative, sometimes it's really difficult to know where to start, you know, to know how to navigate that uncertain field. And so I would love to take some questions for the last few minutes before we close. Of course, if you want to keep sharing in the chat your second stanzas, I'm also very happy to keep reading them. So let's see what we've got. How long did it take you to write the poem? From Charlie, year 6. Charlie, so this is a really good question, because, you know, what we've done today, if you think about it, a very short amount of time was dedicated to the writing of our poems, you know, but we dedicated most of this session to the planning of our poem. Now, for me, I remember really vividly in 2020, I released a poem called The Great Realization, which went viral on the internet, and lots of people watched it, and everyone wanted to know how long it took me to write the poem. I think maybe I'm being too fiddly with language, but I think we're putting too much emphasis on the writing, you know, and not enough on the thinking, on the planning. Thinking is so important. I don't think of thinking as this passive thing that we do when we live our lives on automatic and brush our teeth and go out and get on the bus. I think of thinking as when you present yourself with a problem that you want to solve, right? For this poem, I was trying to imagine what that silence would be. For The Great Realization, I was trying to think, how can I tell a hopeful story, you know, in the middle of a time where so much is going wrong in the world. And so I think that, you know, I think that planning is so important. I think that taking the time to do your 1, 2, 3s, to come up with your stimulus, to ask it questions, to do stream of consciousness, to get as many of those ideas down as possible. If you do that, the writing of the poem becomes so much smoother. Honestly, it's like you want to cook this beautiful meal, but you've prepared all your ingredients, and now you just need to mix them together. You know, I hope that helps. But the writing of this poem, I wrote it in 2 sessions across 2 different days, but I was planning it for about a week and a half. So that gives you an idea of the different weighting, there. When did you start writing poetry? Ooh, okay, this is a lovely question. When did you start writing poetry? And that came from Miss Hadley's class. So I remember I wrote my first poem in school that I got up and delivered for an evening of words and music and teachers and parents and other students present when I was 13 years old. 13 years old. And that wasn't the first time I'd ever written one, but that was the first time I ever spoke one out in public. Now, I'm sure there are some pupils out there who are, like me, really interested in the writing part, really interested in the coming up with ideas and making, you know, what you hope to be a beautiful poem. But the idea of standing up on stage and reading it out in front of people is terrifying. What I want you to know is I remember that too. I remember standing up on stage and being so nervous and having butterflies in my stomach. But what I will tell you is the more that you do that, the easier it gets. And I wrote my first one that I performed when I was 13. You guys are 9 to 11. So if you start now, you will be way better than me by the time you're my age. Let's see, what else do we have? What inspires you to write poems? What inspires you to write poems? The best way to find inspiration is to get really good at noticing things and asking questions, right? To ask questions about the world around you, you know, the whys, the hows, the whens, the whats. That's the best way. So for this poem, for Lasting Silence, you know, the whole poem was born from asking the question of, why do we have a 2-minute silence? What does it mean? What should I be thinking about? What if that silence was a visitor in human form, right? And by asking those questions, then suddenly you find so much inspiration. I think creativity comes from just being curious about the world around you and asking lots and lots of questions. So if you do that, and if you practice that, I don't think you'll ever be short of creativity. Okay, let's have one more question before we wrap up. What is my favourite poem that I have written? That's a lovely question. What was my first poem? What got me into poems? So, quick fire. Miss Jones's class, age 10. What was my first poem? It was called Two Mice, and it's available on my YouTube channel. I hope you like that. But what interested you to get into poetry? Oh, I'm confusing the technical giants that I'm with by quick firing the questions. But to get into poetry, I think I read a lot of Spike Milligan, a lot of Dylan Thomas. I remember reading In the Ning Nang Nong and just thinking it was absolutely wonderful. And then discovering, people, amazing spoken word poets like Kay Tempest, George the Poet, Mark Grist, Holly McNish, John Cooper Clarke, even Leonard Cohen. Some of these people have been such huge inspirations to me that it's really helped me throughout my life to express myself, my thoughts and ideas, and that's what I want for all of you. So just as we bring this session to a close, I want to firstly start by thanking all of you who have shown up today, who have taken the time to share their creativity with the class, to put ideas from their minds onto paper. I also want to say that for anyone who manages to finish this poem, whether it's the one we started or one completely of their own, I think that that's one of the loveliest things you can do. And I'm so thankful to the National Literacy Trust and the Royal British Legion for putting these sessions on, because I think ultimately, through sharing our creativity in ways like this is how we honour all the people that have done all the things. I'm looking through this chat, and you guys have absolutely delivered in terms of ideas, in terms of writing, in terms of words for the word garden. You all are very grateful individuals. You're all very creative individuals, and you've got to hold on to that as you get older, okay? So keep going, keep writing poetry. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I can't wait on November the 11th to tune in and see some of the incredible creativity on display. Thank you, everyone. you.